Hey listener, welcome. I'm glad you could join me tonight. I'm your storyteller, and I'll be your companion as you drift off to sleep. Or perhaps as you lie there wide awake, listening to this story, unsure if you'll ever fall asleep again. It was a Friday afternoon when I first found out that something wasn't quite right. I'd just moved into a small, quiet house on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just a modest two-story with a white picket fence and a garden in the front. It was the kind of house where you could see the entire street from the front porch, and the neighbors were distant enough that you felt like you had your own little corner of the world. It was supposed to be peaceful, a nice change from the chaos of my previous apartment, where I was always surrounded by noise and people. I'd been looking forward to this weekend. My parents had gone out of town for a wedding, and I had the house all to myself for the first time since I'd moved in. It felt like the perfect opportunity to relax, catch up on some much-needed sleep, and maybe watch a few movies. But of course, things never go as planned. It started with the knocks. I remember it so clearly because it was the first thing that made me feel off. It was around 7 p.m., just as the sun had dipped below the horizon. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when I heard it, a soft knock at the door. It wasn't loud enough to be urgent, but it was distinct. At first, I thought it was a neighbor, maybe someone from down the street. But when I went to the door, no one was there. I looked around, checking the porch, the walkway, but there was nothing. No one. I shrugged it off. Maybe it was a car driving by, or maybe I'd just imagined it. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat down again. But then, it happened again. Another knock. The same soft, rhythmic knock. Now I was a little more curious. I looked at the security camera feed on my phone. The front porch looked empty, just the darkened street beyond. But I could hear it, a faint, steady knock. I checked the front window, but there was no one there either. No shadow, no figure, just darkness. I stood there for a moment, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of it. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe some kids messing around, maybe the wind. I mean, it was the perfect kind of night for it, cool but not too cold, the kind of night when the sound of knocking on wood could carry just a little too far. But the knocking didn't stop. It kept coming. Every time I looked away from the camera, there it was again. Knock, knock, knock. I finally grabbed my coat and went outside, half expecting to find a prankster hiding behind a bush. But again, there was nothing. The porch was empty, the street silent. I checked the yard, the driveway, the alleyway next to the house. Still nothing. I even walked around the back to make sure no one had snuck in. When I came back inside, I locked the door again, this time double-checking the deadbolt. I was trying to tell myself I was just being paranoid. I went into the kitchen, made some tea, and tried to relax. But every time I sat back down, the knocking continued. It wasn't just a random sound anymore, it was deliberate, as if someone was testing the door, making sure I was there, watching me. I checked the security cameras again, and that's when I saw it. For a split second, I thought I saw something move in the corner of the frame. It was a shadow, just a flicker of movement, but when I looked again, it was gone. I froze. My heart started racing. There was something wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew I wasn't alone. I called my best friend, Emma, just to hear a familiar voice. "It's probably just a mistake, right?" I said, trying to laugh it off. "Maybe the house is just creaky or something." She didn't seem convinced. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice tense. "You said you checked the cameras, right? What if someone's actually out there?" "I don't know, Emma. I keep thinking I'm just overreacting," I replied. "I keep hearing knocks, but I don't see anyone. It's weird." "You should call the police," she said firmly. "If someone's messing with you, it's better to be safe." I didn't want to be that person who freaks out over nothing, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized Emma was right. So I called the local police, explained the situation, and asked them to do a quick check. They said they'd send someone over in about 30 minutes, which felt like an eternity. While I waited, I kept my eyes glued to the security feed. The knocks were still coming, and now I could hear something else, soft scuffling, as if someone was walking around upstairs. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced through every possible explanation. A bird? A raccoon? But no, this didn't feel like an animal. It felt deliberate, intentional. Then I heard it, a loud thump from above. I froze, barely breathing. It came from the attic. The attic. The place I'd barely ever thought about. The one that had been sealed up for months before I moved in. I hadn't even bothered to check it. What could be up there, right? Just old boxes, forgotten furniture. I grabbed a flashlight and with trembling hands, I crept toward the stairs that led to the attic. I couldn't hear anything anymore, just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock on the wall. The air felt heavy, thick with tension. I felt the weight of my own breathing, my heart pounding in my chest. I climbed the stairs, the wooden steps creaking beneath my feet. When I reached the door to the attic, my hand hovered over the knob. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. This was it. Whatever had been knocking, whatever had been moving around, was up there. I opened the door slowly, the sound of the hinges groaning in protest. The attic was dark, but I could make out the shapes of boxes and old furniture, just like I expected. But then I saw something else, movement in the far corner. There, in the shadows, was a figure. A person. They were sitting on the floor, their knees drawn up to their chest, staring at me. My stomach dropped. I gasped, stumbling back. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The person didn't move. They just sat there, staring. It was as if they had been there the whole time, watching me, listening to my every move. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. Who are you? I whispered, my voice barely a breath. The figure didn't answer. The knocking stopped. The house fell silent. It was only then that I heard the sirens approaching outside. The police arrived moments later. They searched the house, checked every room, every closet, every nook and cranny. They found nothing. The attic was empty, save for a few dusty boxes. But I know what I saw. I know what was up there. That night changed me. I don't feel safe at home anymore. The silence in my house feels different now, like it's always filled with something, watching. Sometimes the quietest places are the ones that hide the most. And sometimes the scariest part isn't what happens in the moment. It's knowing that something could still be there, waiting. Story 2. It was just another late night, nothing out of the ordinary. The clock on my wall blinked 1:47 a.m., and the only sound in the room was the soft hum of the fridge in the kitchen. The kitchen, a place that always felt so familiar, so safe. That is, until that night. I work as a freelance graphic designer, which means my schedule is a bit flexible, but late nights are my thing. The world is quieter, the distractions are fewer, and I can focus. I had been working on a client project for a couple of hours already, barely noticing the time slipping by. The faint glow of my computer screen lit up the otherwise dark room, casting long shadows along the walls. The air outside was cool, the kind of chill that slips through the cracks of your window and sits at the back of your neck. I could hear the occasional car pass by, a dull whoosh of tires against wet pavement. Nothing unusual. Everything felt still, like the night was holding its breath. I was sitting at my desk, deep into a design layout, when I felt it, an odd sensation creeping along my spine. It wasn't the typical someone's watching me feeling. No, this was different. It was subtle, like the shift of something off in the background, too quiet to fully understand. I told myself it was nothing, just the quiet hours of the night playing tricks on my mind. But then I looked up. Through the small kitchen window, I could see a figure. At first, I thought it was just my reflection in the glass. Maybe I'd moved, or maybe it was just a trick of the light. But no, the figure wasn't my reflection. It was someone else. Someone standing there just outside. I froze. I couldn't make out the details. It was too dark outside, but the silhouette was clear enough. A person standing completely still. My heart began to race, but I tried to dismiss the panic rising in me. The window wasn't very wide. It could have been anyone. I told myself it was just a neighbor walking by, someone stopping for a second before heading back to their own place. I pushed my chair back from my desk, took a deep breath, and stood up. I moved toward the kitchen, my feet heavy with uncertainty, but I still didn't want to believe something was wrong. As I got closer to the window, I felt that unease grow. That unsettling feeling wasn't going away. If anything, it was only getting stronger. I paused in front of the window, my hand hovering over the curtain. I couldn't help but feel like I was about to open a door I shouldn't. But I did it anyway, pulling the fabric back just enough to peek outside. Nothing. The figure was gone. I let out a sigh of relief, unsure of whether I was relieved that no one was outside or unsettled by how much I had convinced myself there had been someone standing there. Maybe I was just imagining things. But as I turned away, about to go back to my desk, I noticed something in the corner of my eye. In the reflection of the window. It wasn't outside at all. It was standing behind me. I whipped around, my breath catching in my throat. There, in the reflection of the glass, was the same figure. It wasn't outside, it was inside, in my kitchen. A dark shape, unmoving, standing just a few feet away from me. I felt a cold sweat form on the back of my neck. My heart hammered, and I instinctively stepped back, but the figure didn't move. It was just there. My mind raced. Was someone in my house? Had someone broken in while I was distracted by my computer? I quickly scanned the kitchen. Everything looked normal. The cabinets were closed, the dishes stacked neatly in the sink, the light above the stove flickering as it always did. But that figure, it was still there in the reflection. I knew I had to check, but I didn't want to. My feet seemed rooted to the floor, a sense of dread anchoring me. But I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't just pretend I hadn't seen it. Taking a deep breath, I turned back to the window, forcing myself to look at the reflection again. The figure was still there. It hadn't moved an inch. And that's when I realized something that froze me to the core. It was copying my every movement. When I lifted my hand, so did it. When I turned my head slightly, it mirrored the motion perfectly. No matter how small the gesture, it was as though the figure was mimicking me, watching my every move. I took a step backward. The figure did the same. My blood ran cold. There was no way someone could be moving exactly like I was, perfectly in sync, without any delay. The realization hit me all at once. This wasn't just someone in my house. This thing was following me, copying me, becoming me. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed, just staring at the reflection. Maybe seconds, maybe minutes. But the figure never moved on its own. It stayed exactly where I had left it, mimicking my every shift and twitch. I grabbed my phone from the counter, my hands trembling as I fumbled with it, dialing the number for the police. My mind raced. Who could I call? What could I do? Was this a person? A prank? No. This felt wrong. Deeply wrong. The call didn't go through. The phone screen went black. My hand shook harder as I tried again, but the same thing happened. The figure in the reflection remained, not moving, just standing still. In a burst of adrenaline, I grabbed a knife from the counter, my breathing shallow and quick. If someone was in my house, I was going to defend myself. But I knew deep down that it wasn't a person. Not anymore. This thing wasn't like anyone I'd ever seen. It was my doppelganger. I backed up slowly, keeping my eyes locked on the figure. But just as I turned to grab the door, I heard it. A voice. It was mine. Quiet, almost inaudible, but it was coming from behind me. "Why are you running?" it asked. My blood went cold. The voice sounded like mine, yet it was warped, distant, almost like it was being pulled from the depths of my own fear. I couldn't turn around. I couldn't face it. The door was so close, but my legs wouldn't move. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. The voice spoke again, this time more insistent. "You can't leave." And then I saw it in the reflection. The figure didn't just copy me anymore. It was smiling. That's when I realized the truth. This thing, this doppelganger, had been living with me for weeks, maybe longer. It had been silently lurking, waiting for the right moment to make itself known. I don't know what happened next. The next thing I remember is waking up on the floor, the knife still in my hand, my heart pounding in my chest. When I moved, the figure was gone, but I know it's still here, somewhere, watching, waiting. Story 3. I was 16 when it happened. My parents had decided to take a weekend trip out of town to visit some old friends. It was one of those weekends where everything felt normal, predictable, like life was a little too easy. I mean, who wouldn't enjoy a few days of complete freedom? I didn't expect anything out of the ordinary. But as you'll find out, ordinary is often the exact opposite of what you need to be prepared for. Let me set the stage for you. I live in a quiet, suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where the lawns are perfectly manicured, and you can hear the birds chirping, even at night. People wave at each other when they drive by, and most of the kids are either out playing video games or hanging out in each other's basements. My house isn't huge, but it's comfortable, 2 stories, a nice kitchen, and a big backyard. It was the kind of place where you felt safe, where nothing ever really happened. That Friday afternoon, I came home from school, grabbed a snack, and settled in front of the TV. I wasn't doing anything out of the ordinary, just the usual teenage weekend routine. My parents were gone, and I had the house to myself for the next 2 days. I remember sitting there, staring at the screen, my mind drifting, not thinking about much of anything at all. That's when I first heard it. At first, it was just a small sound, like something scraping against the wall. I told myself it was nothing, maybe the wind or the house settling. But then a few minutes later, I heard it again. A tap. Soft, almost muffled, but unmistakable. I looked around, trying to figure out where it was coming from. The house was empty, and I hadn't heard anything out of the ordinary all day. I stood up and walked around, checking the windows, the doors, and the closets, but everything seemed fine. No one was there. I laughed it off. It was probably just the house doing its thing. But as the evening wore on, the sounds kept coming back, quiet knocks and rustling noises that seemed to follow me from room to room. It was like someone was in the house, but I couldn't find them. And every time I went to check, there was nothing. That's when the doorbell rang. It was just before midnight. I was in the living room, trying to focus on my phone, when I heard the sound of footsteps outside. I froze. No one ever came to our house at this hour. It was late, and I wasn't expecting anyone. But when I looked out the window, I saw someone standing on the porch. At first, I thought it was a prank, maybe one of my friends messing with me. But then I saw who it was. It was Mr. Albright, the neighbor from 2 houses down. He was standing at the door, staring at it, his face pale, eyes wide with what looked like concern. I was confused. Why would he be here this late? I walked to the door, feeling uneasy. "Hey, Mr. Albright," I said, trying to sound normal. "Is everything okay?" He glanced around nervously, then leaned closer to the door and whispered, his voice barely audible. "Don't open the door to anyone else tonight. Not a single soul. Do you hear me?" I stared at him, my heart beginning to race. "What? Why?" He stepped back, looking over his shoulder as if someone might be watching him. "Just trust me," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Don't open the door, not for anyone." Before I could say anything else, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night like he had just been a ghost. I stood there, confused and a little freaked out. I had never seen Mr. Albright act that way before. He was always a quiet guy, never one to make a scene. And yet, here he was, acting as though he knew something I didn't. I closed the door and locked it, my mind racing. Should I call my parents? Should I tell someone else? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The air in the house felt thick, like something was pressing down on me. I was alone, and I couldn't shake the paranoia creeping in. The night passed slowly. The sounds from earlier grew louder. I could hear things moving in the walls, the faint scraping noises growing to the point where it was almost unbearable. I tried to ignore it, but it felt like the house itself was alive, and I was trapped inside. Around 3 a.m., I finally decided to check the doors and windows one more time. The house was still locked up tight, but when I reached the back door, I saw something that made my heart stop. The sliding glass door was cracked open, just a sliver, as though someone had been trying to get inside. My pulse quickened. I was sure I had locked that door earlier, but now it was ajar. I stood there, staring at it, my mind racing. Could someone have been in the house while I wasn't looking? I quickly closed it and locked it again, but the fear in my chest wouldn't subside. I knew something was wrong. But what? The next morning, when I heard my parents' car pull into the driveway, I rushed outside to greet them, eager to tell them everything that had happened. But when I told them about Mr. Albright's warning, they looked at me like I was crazy. "Sweetie, you're probably just imagining things," my mom said, ruffling my hair. "It's late and you're tired. Maybe you just heard some noises in the house." But I knew it wasn't just my imagination. Something had happened that night. Something strange, something terrifying. Later that afternoon, I decided to go over to Mr. Albright's house and talk to him. I wanted to know why he had acted the way he did. Maybe I was just paranoid, but I needed to hear it from him. When I knocked on his door, his wife answered, and I asked if Mr. Albright was home. She gave me a strange look, then told me that he wasn't there. She said he had gone out earlier that morning and hadn't returned since. "Are you sure?" I asked, a chill running down my spine. "He was just here last night, right before I went to bed." Her face went pale. "No, honey, he hasn't been home in 2 days." I felt a cold shiver run through me. The man I had seen last night, the one who had warned me, wasn't Mr. Albright. He couldn't have been. But if it wasn't him, then who had come to my door? I don't know if I'll ever really know what happened that night, but I do know this. I don't feel safe in that house anymore. Every noise, every shadow feels like something is watching me. And every time I pass by Mr. Albright's house, I can't help but wonder, was he watching me the whole time? Was he really trying to protect me? Or was there something more sinister going on? Sometimes the scariest part isn't what happens. It's knowing that you might never understand what was really going on. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most terrifying thing of all. Story 4. It was the summer before my senior year at college. After a grueling semester, I couldn't wait to escape the hustle and bustle of campus life and spend a quiet summer in the old house I'd rented just outside town. The house had always been a bit of a mystery to me. I'd found it on Craigslist, listed as a secluded getaway perfect for someone who needed peace and quiet. Secluded it was, nestled in a patch of woods just beyond the edge of town, The house was small but had an old-world charm, a little rundown but comfortable enough for a summer break. The rent was cheap, which was a huge relief for me. I'd be living alone, no roommates to deal with, no noise, just me and my thoughts. When I arrived, the house was exactly as I remembered from the pictures. There was an old porch that creaked beneath my feet and a garden that hadn't seen much care in years, but it felt peaceful. I'd been looking forward to this. No deadlines, no assignments, just days to relax and unwind. I had a couple of books to read and a journal to fill. I thought it'd be the perfect escape. As I unpacked my bags, I noticed something strange. A small, leather-bound journal was tucked beneath the loose floorboard in the corner of the bedroom. At first, I thought it might just be an old book left behind by the previous tenant, but something about it felt different. It wasn't like the usual knickknacks or forgotten items people leave behind. This journal looked used, worn, as if it had been handled repeatedly. Curious, I opened it, and the first page revealed a name, Laura White. I assumed that was the previous tenant, though I didn't recall anyone by that name. The first few pages were nothing unusual, an account of daily activities, grocery lists, and plans for the future. But as I flipped through, the tone started to shift. The entries became more erratic, filled with strange observations and a growing sense of unease. July 5th. I keep hearing knocks at the door, but no one's there when I answer. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but it's happening more often now. I'm starting to feel like someone's watching me. July 12th. The knocks came again, but this time they were different. Loud, insistent. I checked all the windows and doors, nothing. I feel like I'm being followed, even inside my own house. I wasn't sure what to make of it. Maybe it was just the ramblings of someone who had been isolated for too long. But the further I read, the more unsettling it became. July 18th. The knocking is louder now, and it's not just at the door. It's coming from the walls. I'm hearing whispers too, like someone's just out of earshot, speaking in a language I can't understand. It's driving me mad. I don't know how much longer I can stay here. The last entry was the worst. It sent a chill through my bones as I read it aloud, the words feeling heavier with every passing second. July 22nd. It's been a week since I first heard the knocks. Tonight, I heard them again. But this time I opened the door. I shouldn't have. There was no one there, but I heard a voice, soft but unmistakable. You were never meant to stay here. And then I felt it, a cold hand on my shoulder. When I turned around, there was no one. I don't know what to do. I hear them again, those whispers, louder now. I can't take it anymore. I don't think I'll survive this night. The journal ended there. No more entries. No explanation. Just that chilling last sentence. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The house, the journal, it all felt off. I put the journal down and looked around. The house seemed just like any other old house. There was nothing unusual about it. Yet, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the words I had just read. Was it just paranoia, or had something really happened to Laura White? That night, I tried to shake it off. I made myself some dinner and sat down to watch a movie, but I couldn't focus. The thought of that journal kept creeping back into my mind. I couldn't stop imagining what had happened to her. Had she been just like me, alone, in a house far from civilization, hearing strange things in the night? What if the same thing happened to me? Around midnight, I heard it, a soft knock. At first, I thought it was just the house settling. Maybe it was the wind, or maybe it was a tree branch tapping against the window. But then it came again. Another knock. Then a third. I froze. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just being paranoid, but the knock came again, louder this time. Who's there? I called out, my voice shaking. No answer. I rushed to the door, but when I opened it, there was no one there. The porch light flickered, and the air outside felt heavy. It was like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't quite see. Something wrong. I stepped back inside and locked the door, but the feeling of dread didn't leave. The knocking had been real. It wasn't just my imagination. I thought of the journal. I hadn't imagined it. The same thing had happened to Laura White. And now it was happening to me. The next day, I tried to go about my business, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. Every time I left the house, I had the distinct sensation that I was being watched. And at night, the whispers would start. At first, they were faint, just on the edge of hearing, but soon they grew louder, like voices right behind the walls. I tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. The knock came again, just like the night before. And again, when I opened the door, no one was there. But this time I heard it, the voice. "You were never meant to stay here." I slammed the door shut and locked it, my heart racing. I couldn't breathe. I could feel the weight of the air pressing down on me. I tried to call someone, anyone, but the phone line was dead. No signal. I ran to the window and looked outside, but there was nothing. The house was still, silent. That night, the knocking was louder than ever. It shook the entire house, rattling the windows. I sat in the dark, clutching the journal, my hands trembling. My heart was pounding in my chest as I stared at the door. And then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. I wanted to run. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to open the door, even though I knew what was waiting on the other side. I had read the journal. I knew what was coming. I could hear the whispering again, growing louder, as if they were right behind me. "You were never meant to stay here." I turned around, but there was nothing. Nothing but the dark, the whispers, and the door. The knock stopped, but somehow I knew they weren't over. I didn't know what was waiting for me, but I knew it wouldn't be long before I found out. And when it came, I wouldn't be able to stop it. The house was never meant for anyone to stay. It was a place of secrets, forgotten ones, and now it had claimed me. I don't know how much longer I'll be here. I don't know if I'll make it out, but if you're ever alone in a place like this, remember the story. Sometimes the forgotten secrets are the most dangerous ones, and sometimes they don't let you leave. Story 5. I've never been one to believe in scary stories, not really. Sure, I've heard the usual urban legends, the ones that make you shiver for a second, but I always thought they were just that, stories. That is, until I moved into my first apartment. I'm Rachel, 23 years old at the time, and I'd just gotten a job working in a small coffee shop down the street from my place. I didn't have much going for me in terms of social life. My family was 1,000 miles away, and most of my friends were scattered around the country, so I kept to myself. I wasn't a loner, just someone who preferred to keep their circle small. My apartment was everything I wanted, small, cozy, a little rundown in that charming kind of way, but it was mine. It was the middle of winter when I first moved in, cold, quiet, and with the occasional snowstorm blanketing the streets. The apartment building was old, one of those places that probably had a few stories under its belt. The kind of place you pass by and think, that's seen some things. But it was affordable, and that was all that mattered to me. The first week went by like any other. I worked, came home, and did the usual unpacking. It felt good to have a place to call my own, even if it wasn't anything extravagant. The first few nights were peaceful, nothing unusual, just the hum of the radiator and the creaks of the old wood floors. I liked the solitude, but then about a week in, I started hearing things. It wasn't anything major, just faint sounds like a door creaking open or the soft shuffle of footsteps coming from the basement. I told myself it was nothing. The building was old, and old buildings make noise, right? The first time I heard it, I was sitting in my living room, scrolling through my phone, when I heard what sounded like footsteps coming from below. I paused, listening closely. It was late, and the building was quiet. Maybe the wind was causing the floorboards to groan. Or maybe it was the old pipes acting up. I shrugged it off and went to bed, convincing myself it was nothing. But then it kept happening. The sounds came almost every night, just after midnight, soft, almost imperceptible. Footsteps, movement. But every time I tried to investigate, there was nothing. The basement was locked, and it seemed like no one else lived in the building. At least, I'd never seen anyone besides the elderly woman who lived 2 floors above me. A week passed, and the sounds became more frequent. They didn't bother me at first, until I started noticing things. Small things. My kitchen utensils weren't where I'd left them, my shoes were out of place, and sometimes my bathroom light was on when I knew I had turned it off. I tried to chalk it up to my own forgetfulness. Maybe I was just tired, but the nagging thought lingered. One night, after I got home from work, I heard something that made my heart skip a beat. It was a soft scrape, like something being dragged across the floor, coming from the basement. I froze. The basement door was locked. I hadn't been near it, and I was sure I hadn't heard any footsteps this time. It was just that unsettling sound, faint but definitely there. I stood at the top of the stairs, listening. I was debating whether or not I should call the landlord. Maybe the building was haunted, or maybe some homeless person had found their way in. But the more I thought about it, the more I convinced myself it was nothing. It had to be, right? But the next day, something changed. The feeling in the air was different. It was as if the apartment was holding its breath, and I was the only one who could hear it. I felt like I was being watched. It wasn't just the sounds anymore. It was the little things that kept happening. Things that shouldn't have made me feel uneasy but did. My favorite book had been moved from the shelf, and my coffee mug was on the counter when I knew I'd left it in the sink. The paranoia started setting in. What was going on? Was I losing my mind? Or was there someone who was sneaking around my apartment? I decided to confront it. I couldn't go on like this. I gathered my courage and went down to the basement, armed with a flashlight and my phone, ready to call the police if I needed to. The door was just as I remembered, old, heavy, and locked. But there was a faint light flickering beneath the crack at the bottom. I held my breath, heart pounding in my chest. I turned the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The lock was old, but it was sturdy. I tried knocking. "Hello?" I called out, hoping for an answer, but there was nothing. I shook my head, irritated with myself. What was I doing? I was acting crazy, but something in my gut told me it wasn't over. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every noise in the apartment made me jump. Creaks, groans, the faint sound of a door opening. It was as if the walls were closing in on me, and I couldn't escape. I kept telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. The next morning, I did something I should have done days ago. I called my landlord. "Mr. Thomas," I said when he picked up, my voice tight, "I think someone's been in my apartment." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a slow, deliberate reply. "What makes you think that?" I explained about the sounds, the missing items, the feeling of being watched. He didn't seem too concerned, but he promised to come by that evening to check things out. That night, he showed up with a key to the basement door, something I hadn't realized he had. "I'll take a look down there," he said. "Maybe it's just a maintenance issue." I didn't have much faith in that explanation, but I watched as he unlocked the door and descended into the basement, calling out to see if anyone was there. I followed, though hesitantly. The basement was dark and cold, the only light coming from his flashlight. I didn't see anything unusual at first, but then, as he moved toward a far corner, I saw it. A vent slightly ajar, just above the floor. It was small, barely noticeable. "Is that a vent?" I asked, my voice shaky. He nodded. "Yeah, it's part of the old heating system. It's not in use anymore, but I've had to patch up a few of these in other units." I couldn't explain why, but something about that vent didn't sit right with me. My heart started racing again. It was too small for someone to fit through, wasn't it? But that's when I noticed the faintest smudge of dirt around its edges. I felt a chill run down my spine. The landlord seemed to shrug it off, assuming it was nothing. He went back upstairs, leaving me standing there in the cold basement. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, had been hiding in there watching me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how easy it would have been for someone to slip in and out without my knowing. They could have been watching me for days, weeks even. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I kept imagining eyes watching me through the walls, through that vent. I had to leave. I packed up my things, grabbed my keys, and went to stay with a friend for the night. I never went back to that apartment. The landlord called me the next day, asking if I wanted to come back. I told him I was moving out, and I haven't looked back since. To this day, I still don't know who or what was in my basement. The worst part is that I'll never know for sure. But I've learned something important through all of this. When your gut tells you something is wrong, you should listen. Because sometimes the scariest part isn't the thing that happens. It's the fact that you might never find out who or what was behind it all. Be careful when you're alone. You never know who's silently watching you. Story 6. I know it sounds crazy, but I swear to you, everything I'm about to tell you happened exactly how I'll describe it. I still get chills when I think about it. It was the summer of 2018. I was 16, living in a small town in Ohio. You probably wouldn't have heard of it, and to be honest, you're not missing out. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where nothing exciting ever happens. That's the way I liked it, to be honest, quiet, safe, even a little boring. I spent most of my days at home, on my phone or watching random YouTube videos. My parents worked late, so it wasn't unusual for me to be home alone, especially in the evenings. The night it all started, the weather was warm, and the air smelled like freshly cut grass. Nothing about the night seemed off at all. I had just finished a late dinner, a simple bowl of cereal, and was watching a new video that just dropped on my favorite channel. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet where every creak of the house feels a little too loud, but I didn't think much of it. I was sprawled on the couch, phone in hand, lost in some mindless app when my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize flashed on the screen. Normally I wouldn't have answered, but for some reason I did. "Hello," I said, not expecting much. "Hey, it's me," the voice on the other end said. I froze. It sounded like me, but not exactly. There was something off about it, like the voice was stretched, like the words had a weight to them, a sense of urgency that caught me off guard. "Who is this?" I asked, trying to sound normal, though a knot was already forming in my stomach. "It's you," the voice said again. "Your future self. You need to listen to me, okay?" I laughed nervously, thinking maybe this was some weird prank. I was about to hang up when the voice continued. "You have to lock all the doors now. Don't wait, just do it. There's someone who's coming." The message sent a strange chill down my spine. I didn't know whether to laugh or be scared. "Okay, very funny," I said. "I don't know who's messing with me, but it's not funny anymore." But the voice didn't stop. "Please listen. You have to lock every door, and stay away from the windows. You're in danger. I'm trying to help you." I swallowed hard, my fingers frozen on the phone. "This isn't funny," I repeated, but there was a strange edge to my voice. The way the person said my name, like they knew me intimately, made it feel different from any prank I'd ever heard. It wasn't a game anymore. "Just trust me," the voice urged. "Lock the doors now, and stay in the living room." At this point, I was no longer laughing. I stood up, still holding my phone, and walked to the door, locking it without thinking. A part of me thought it was ridiculous, but another part, the part that was deep down terrified, didn't question it. I even checked the back door, the windows. I don't know why I listened, but the whole thing just felt so real. When I was finished, I went back to the couch, my heart pounding, my mind racing. I glanced at my phone again. The call was still connected, but the voice was silent now. I sat there in the silence for what felt like hours, but it was probably just minutes. My mind spun with questions, all of them unanswered. Who was that? What did they want from me? And why? Why me? Then the phone rang again. I didn't even hesitate this time. I picked it up immediately. "Did you do it?" the voice asked. "Yeah, I locked the doors. I'm sitting here," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Good. Now listen carefully. There's someone in the house with you." My blood ran cold. The panic I had managed to push down was suddenly rising again, suffocating me. I looked around the living room, my eyes darting to the windows, the door. The house was still. Too still. I'm alone," I stammered, barely able to speak. "Don't trust it," the voice said, urgency in every word. "That's not you. You're not alone. You're not alone anymore. Trust me, you have to go upstairs. Get out of sight." I didn't ask questions. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my phone and rushed up the stairs, barely making a sound. I went straight to my room and locked the door behind me. Sitting on my bed, I held the phone to my ear. "Are you still there?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Yes," the voice answered, now more soothing than before. "Stay there. Don't move. Don't open the door." I was shaking. I could feel my heart racing, the adrenaline pumping through my veins. What was happening? Who was in the house? Why was this happening to me? "I'm scared," I said, barely able to speak the words. "Don't worry," the voice said. "Just stay hidden. You're safe for now. But you need to remember something. Something you'll forget." "Forget?" I asked, not sure I understood. "What do I need to remember?" The voice grew softer. "Remember that you're not alone. You haven't been alone for years. Someone has been watching you." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean? Who?" But the line went silent. I sat there, waiting for more, but there was nothing. Not a word, not a sound. Just the ringing in my ears and the empty, suffocating silence of the room. That's when I heard it. A sound, faint at first, but it grew louder. A slow creak, like someone walking across the floorboards downstairs. It wasn't the house settling. It was footsteps. Someone was in the house. My breath caught in my throat as I slowly turned to the door. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The phone rang again. I picked it up without thinking. "What's happening? What do I do?" The voice was calm now, almost sad. "It's too late. I'm sorry. I didn't understand." "Too late for what? What's going on? What's happening?" The voice sighed, the sound full of regret. "You've been dead for years, kid. I just didn't know how to tell you." I dropped the phone. I dropped everything. My whole world felt like it was crumbling around me. My hand trembled as I picked the phone back up, staring at the number. It was my number, my phone, my name. But that wasn't me anymore. That wasn't me. I tried to get up, to scream, but my body wouldn't listen. I couldn't move. I could only sit there, frozen, with the knowledge that everything I thought I knew was a lie. The calls kept coming, but I never answered again. I never moved. And now here I am, telling you this story, hoping someone will understand. Because sometimes the scariest thing is not what happens in the moment. It's knowing that it never really ends. Story 7. It's funny, isn't it? How something as simple as a light in the distance can make you question everything. My name's Emma, and I was 17 when it happened. It's not something I talk about much. People wouldn't believe me anyway. But there are nights, especially when I'm alone, that I still think about it. It all started when my parents decided to leave me behind for a weekend in the woods. They thought I'd be fine. It was a quiet cabin in the middle of nowhere, nothing but trees, squirrels, and the occasional deer to keep me company. At first, I thought it would be peaceful, but it turned into something else entirely. Our cabin was nestled deep in a forest, far away from the nearest town. It was old, but cozy, and that was part of its charm. I loved the quiet of it, the sound of the wind rustling through the pines, the chirp of crickets at night, and the endless stretch of sky. My parents, as usual, were off to a work event, and I was left with the responsibility of taking care of the house. It wasn't a big deal. I spent the days on my phone, caught up in social media and Netflix, the usual teen things. At night, I made dinner, curled up with a book or watched TV. But something strange happened on the second night. It was about midnight when I first saw it. I had just gotten out of the shower, my hair wrapped in a towel, when I noticed the lights. At first, I thought it was nothing, a trick of the eyes, maybe the reflection of something inside the cabin. But no, I was standing in the kitchen, making myself a cup of tea, when I saw them again. There were flickering lights in the distance, deep in the woods. It wasn't just one light either. There were several, scattered throughout the trees, pulsing faintly like fireflies. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe some hikers or campers had set up in the area, or maybe the lights were from a nearby town. But something about them didn't sit right. They weren't like any normal lights I'd seen before. There was something off about the way they flickered, almost rhythmic, like they were trying to signal me. I shook it off, grabbed my tea, and tried to forget about it. But the next night, it happened again. Only this time, there was something different. The lights weren't just flickering. They were moving, slowly, like they were traveling deeper into the woods. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but no. I could see them clearly, and they were getting closer. I could feel my heart rate pick up, a cold sweat running down my back as I stood frozen in place by the window watching them. The lights continued to move, like a procession, making their way through the trees, always flickering, always coming closer. I told myself again that it was nothing. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I was seeing things. But even as I thought that, my mind raced with the possibilities. What if they were people? What if they were lost hikers, wandering in the woods at night, with nothing but their flashlights to guide them? But something told me that wasn't it. I don't know why I didn't call my parents, why I didn't just leave the cabin. Maybe it was because I didn't want to seem foolish, or maybe I thought I could handle it on my own. But as the night went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. By the time the lights had moved so close I could make out their shapes, flickering just beyond the edge of the trees, I decided I had to investigate. I stepped outside onto the porch, the cold air biting at my skin as I gazed into the dark woods. The lights were brighter now, more intense, but still, they had a strange, unearthly quality to them. The trees around me seemed to shift in the breeze, the shadows stretching unnaturally long. For a moment, everything was still. Then I heard a voice. It wasn't loud, but it was clear, like a whisper carried on the wind. "Help!" I froze, my heart thudding in my chest. I was sure I hadn't imagined it. It wasn't my mind playing tricks. The voice was real. I stepped back, and then it came again, this time louder. "Help me!" I spun around, looking for the source. But there was nothing. just the flickering lights in the woods and the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. That's when I saw them. At first, it was just a shape, a figure standing in the shadows at the edge of the woods. It was hard to make out, but I could tell it was tall, slender. It stood still, watching me, unmoving, as if it were waiting for something. I stepped back, my heart racing as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. I don't know why, but I decided to take one more step. I don't know what I was expecting, maybe that the figure would step forward, or that the lights would stop flickering. But instead, something even stranger happened. The figure didn't move. Instead, the lights behind it began to form shapes. There were no shadows, no flickers of movement. Just a row of people, standing in the darkness, each one holding a light. They stood in perfect formation, their faces hidden, their bodies still, like they were waiting for something. And that's when I understood. The lights weren't from lost hikers. They weren't a coincidence. They were signals. Signals from people who had been trapped in the woods for decades. People who had gotten lost long ago and now wandered the forest, waiting for someone to find them. And now they were coming for me. I ran back inside, slamming the door behind me and locking it with shaking hands. The lights continued to flicker outside, and the voice, now more urgent, echoed in my ears. "Help, please." I grabbed my phone, dialing my parents' number, but there was no signal. The connection was dead. My mind raced, panic threatening to overwhelm me. I felt trapped. The lights outside grew brighter, the figures moving closer, still carrying their signals. They weren't just in the woods anymore. They were at the edge of the cabin, standing just beyond the trees. I could feel them watching me, waiting. For a moment, I thought about running. But where could I go? The forest stretched for miles in every direction. There was no escape. Then, the door handle began to rattle. I jumped back, my breath catching in my throat. I could hear footsteps outside, slow and deliberate, as if someone or something was testing the door. The figure from before appeared in the window, its face still hidden in shadow, its form barely visible in the dim light. The rattle of the door grew louder, more insistent. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen, my hand shaking as I stood by the door. The voice came again, softer now, almost a plea. "Let us in." I didn't know what to do. I could hear the footsteps moving around the cabin now, the whispers growing louder. They were everywhere, closing in on me from all sides. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The rattling at the door ceased. The voices went silent. I stood frozen, the knife still in my hand, waiting for something, anything to happen. But nothing did. The lights in the woods had disappeared. The figures were gone, and all that remained was the silence of the forest, broken only by the sound of my own breath. I don't know how long I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest. Eventually, I dared to open the door, stepping out into the night, but there was nothing. The woods were quiet. The lights were gone. But something was still wrong. It's been years since that night, and I haven't been back to that cabin. My parents don't understand why. I've tried to forget about it, tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but I can't. Sometimes in the middle of the night, I still hear that voice, faint but clear, calling out to me from the woods. Help! And I wonder if I ever go back, will they still be there? Watching, waiting, for me. Sometimes the scariest part isn't what happens. It's knowing it could happen again. Story 8. It was a Friday afternoon when I found myself alone in my house. The kind of day where the sun shines bright and everything feels so ordinary. My name's Emma. I was 17 at the time, living in a small suburban neighborhood. You know, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone's business and everything always seems just fine. No one worries. It's the kind of place you take for granted. Boring really, but safe. That afternoon, I'd had a huge argument with my parents. They were leaving for the weekend, some weekend getaway that, to be honest, they'd planned for months. They weren't happy with me after I snapped at them, especially when I had no real reason for it. I wasn't even upset, just irritated and tired from school. And they knew how to push my buttons. It didn't help that I was already frustrated about everything, school, my friends, everything. It was dumb, I know, but after that fight, they left, and it was just me in the house, alone. At first, I was relieved. I had the house to myself. I'd always wanted to stay home alone, to have that freedom. But as the day turned to night, something about the emptiness started to feel off. I don't know how to explain it. It wasn't just the silence. It was the waiting. You know, that feeling you get when you're just waiting for something to happen, but nothing does. That's how I felt. Like there was something just beyond my awareness, something I couldn't put my finger on. I was sitting in the living room, flipping through TV channels. My phone was on the couch next to me, buzzing occasionally with notifications from friends, but I was too out of it to respond. The house felt quieter than usual. No noises, no one moving around. Just me. I remember glancing over at the clock. It was around 8:30 p.m. That's when I first heard it. At first, I thought I was just hearing things. It was soft, so soft, in fact, that I almost convinced myself it was my imagination. Footsteps. Light ones, almost like someone was walking around in socks. But I knew no one was there. My parents were miles away, and I hadn't heard the door open. I sat there for a second, staring at the living room wall, waiting for the sound to come again. But it didn't. I figured I was being paranoid. It was late, and maybe my mind was just playing tricks on me. So, I turned the volume up on the TV to drown out the feeling in my gut. But then it happened again. Step, step. I jumped a little, the sound unnerving me. I set the remote down and slowly stood up. The house felt so empty. I walked into the hallway, toward the stairs leading to the second floor. Nothing seemed out of place, but that feeling didn't go away. It was like I wasn't alone. The house was too still, too quiet, too off. I walked around the kitchen, then the living room, checking the windows, the doors. Locked. Nothing had changed. Yet the unease lingered. I shook it off, telling myself it was just my nerves, and tried to go back to my show. I was staring at the screen when I heard it again. The footsteps. But this time they were closer, and they weren't stopping. I could hear them moving. Not just one or two footsteps. This time, the sound was traveling through the house. Toward me. I stood frozen for a moment. There was no one there. No one. But the footsteps were getting louder now, closer, as if someone was walking right behind me. Step, step, step. I spun around, but the room was empty. No one. My heart was racing. Maybe it was just the floorboards. Maybe they were creaking. But the sound was so distinct, so real. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The tension in my chest was unbearable. I backed up slowly, keeping my eyes on the hallway, my pulse thudding in my ears. That's when I saw it. The door to the basement was slightly ajar. It shouldn't have been. I hadn't opened it. My parents never left it open. My body moved on its own as I stepped toward it. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it fully open, half expecting to find someone hiding in the darkness. But nothing. Just the faint smell of dust and old wood. I quickly shut it again, locking the door behind me. My mind was racing. Maybe the stress of being alone was just getting to me. But something was wrong. I could feel it now, deep in my bones. The house wasn't just quiet. It was waiting, watching me. The footsteps continued. They followed me wherever I went. In the kitchen, through the hallway, up the stairs. I could hear them moving behind me, as if someone were pacing through the house just out of sight. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the house settling. Maybe there was an animal in the walls. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But the longer it went on, the harder it was to believe. These weren't just random sounds. These footsteps had purpose. They were intentional, and they were getting closer. I went into my parents' bedroom and grabbed the phone from their nightstand. I called my best friend, Tara. "Hello," she answered, her voice thick with sleep. "Tara, I think someone's in the house," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What? Emma, what are you talking about?" "I keep hearing footsteps. It's like someone is following me," I said, my breath coming in shallow gasps. "I'm not crazy, Tara. I swear. I've checked the whole house. No one's here, but I hear them." There was a long pause. "You're just alone, Emma. You're probably just freaking out, okay? Just sit down and breathe. You're fine." I wasn't fine. I couldn't calm down. "But Tara, I keep hearing them," I pleaded. "I'm coming over," she said, but her words didn't bring me comfort. I felt like I needed more than just her. I needed someone, anyone, to help me figure out what was going on. It was around 10:30 when I hung up the phone. I waited by the door, staring at the stairs, every sound in the house amplifying in my ears. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run, but there was no way out. The footsteps were now all around me. The house had become an endless maze of noise and silence. Then it happened. The footsteps stopped. For a split second, everything was quiet. So quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my chest. I stood up and walked slowly toward the staircase, barely able to breathe. That's when I heard it. A voice. It was faint, almost like a whisper, but it was unmistakable. It came from the shadows of the hall. "Emma." I froze. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't my parents. It wasn't Tara. No one had been here. No one could have made that sound. But the voice called out again. "Emma." The voice was too real. Too close. My knees buckled beneath me, and I collapsed onto the stairs, my eyes wide, staring at the hallway. I could feel something in the air. A pressure. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, and the footsteps started again, louder, faster. But this time, they were moving in all directions. I bolted upright and ran for the door, but when I reached it, it wouldn't budge. The handle wouldn't turn. It was locked from the outside. I was trapped. Then, just as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. No more footsteps. No more whispers. The air felt thick, suffocating, as I stood there in the silence, my heart hammering in my chest. Tara arrived minutes later. She found me standing by the door, crying. I didn't even know why I was crying, but I couldn't explain it. I couldn't tell her what had happened. And when we finally left the house, I thought it was over. But it wasn't. Weeks later, I found out the house had been abandoned before my parents bought it. The previous owners, an elderly couple, had disappeared without a trace. The neighbors said they'd heard strange noises too. Footsteps, voices. They said the house had a history, a dark one. That was the first time I realized it wasn't just my imagination. The house wasn't just empty, it was haunted. And every night since then, whenever I'm alone, I can still hear them. The footsteps, the whispers, they're always just out of reach. Watching, waiting. Maybe they're still in the house. Maybe they're out there watching me. I don't know, but I do know this. Sometimes the scariest part isn't what happened. It's knowing it could happen again. Story 9. I'll never forget that day. It started like any other, ordinary, quiet, and safe. But sometimes, that's the thing about normal days. You don't realize how fragile the illusion is until it shatters. I want to tell you about something that happened to me one evening when I was home alone. If you think it's just another creepy package story, trust me, it's not. There's a twist to this one, something that I still can't wrap my head around. Let me back up for a second. My name is Alex, and at the time, I was living in a small 2-bedroom apartment in the suburbs. I was 24, just started a new job, and life felt, well, normal. Boring even. I didn't have any family nearby. They lived on the other side of the country. My friends were busy with their own lives, so I spent a lot of time on my own. But that wasn't unusual for me. I liked being alone. It gave me time to think, to do my own thing. It was peaceful, safe. That particular Friday afternoon, I was working from home. The weather outside was dreary, cloudy, with the occasional drizzle. Not the kind of day you want to be outside. So, I had settled in for a long day of emails, reports, and meetings. But everything changed when I got the knock. I wasn't expecting anyone. I don't get much company, and the only deliveries I get are from online orders I occasionally make. So when I heard a soft knock on the door, it caught me off guard. I didn't know who it was. I opened the door cautiously. There was no one there, just a small, unmarked package on the doorstep. It wasn't unusual to receive things like that, but what struck me was the fact that it had no return address. No name. Nothing to indicate who had sent it. I was curious, but I didn't think much of it. I figured it was just another random item I had ordered, or some mistake by the delivery company. But as I picked it up, something felt off. It wasn't heavy, but it had a certain weight to it, and the cardboard was old, like it had been sitting around for years. I closed the door behind me and set the package down on the kitchen counter. The sound of the rain against the windows was the only noise in the apartment. I took a deep breath and carefully started to open it. My fingers brushed the rough tape, and as I peeled it back, the contents slowly revealed themselves. Inside was an old, worn-out camera. It looked like something from the 90s. You know, the kind of camera you used to see at family events, the ones that still used film. It was strange. The camera seemed completely out of place in my modern apartment. At first, I thought maybe it was just some old junk someone had sent me as a joke. But then I noticed something else. A small note was tucked under the camera. I unfolded it, expecting to read some cryptic message or joke, but it was just a few words. Watch carefully. My mind raced. What did that mean? Who would send me this? And why? I shrugged it off as someone's weird sense of humor, but I couldn't help feeling a twinge of unease. I decided to take a look at the camera. It was in surprisingly good condition for its age, but it was clearly old. I figured maybe it was worth a few bucks, so I inserted the batteries it came with and pressed the power button. To my surprise, it turned on. The screen flickered to life, showing the viewfinder. But there was something strange about the footage. At first, it looked like the camera was recording a normal room. The walls, the furniture, everything looked fine. Then in the corner of the screen I saw it. A figure, standing in the background. It wasn't me. I was sitting at the kitchen table, holding the camera, but there, in the reflection of the darkened corner of my living room, was a person. A shadowy figure standing still. The figure was wearing something dark, a hoodie, and its face was hidden in the shadows. The figure was completely still, just watching. I felt my stomach drop. My hands went cold. I turned around, but the room was empty. There was nothing behind me, just the silence of my apartment. I immediately hit pause on the camera. My mind was racing. Was this a prank? But it didn't feel like one. It felt too real, too unsettling. I decided to rewind the footage, thinking maybe I could catch a glimpse of the person moving. But when I played it again, the figure was still there, standing in the corner, unmoving. And then something happened. The figure moved slightly, just a twitch of the head like it was acknowledging my presence. It was subtle, but it sent a chill through me. At that moment, I couldn't breathe. I was paralyzed, staring at the screen. I wanted to believe it was some kind of glitch or a trick of the light, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. I turned around again. My apartment was the same as it had been for hours. Nothing had changed. But now, every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the window felt amplified. I felt the walls closing in on me. My hands were shaking. I grabbed my phone and called my friend, Sarah. I needed to hear a familiar voice, someone to talk me through this. "Hey Sarah, it's Alex. I just got this weird package, and there's a camera in it. The weirdest thing happened. I was looking at the footage, and there's someone in the background of my place. It looks like they've been here the whole time, even before I moved in. Can you come over?" Sarah was silent for a moment. "Alex, that's creepy. But are you sure it's not just some prank? Maybe someone left it there as a joke. Have you checked the rest of the footage?" I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I've checked, and I don't know how to explain it. There's no way someone got in here without me knowing." "All right, calm down. I'll be there in 15 minutes, she said. I ended the call, but something told me not to wait. I decided to check the rest of the footage. I hit play again, my eyes glued to the screen. The figure was still there, but now something had changed. The figure's face, if you could call it a face, was clearer. There was something about it that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It looked like a distorted reflection of me. It was as if the figure was an echo of someone who had been there long before I ever moved in. The hair, the posture, everything seemed too familiar. But it wasn't me. I couldn't take it anymore. I jumped up and paced around the room, trying to make sense of it. My mind was racing. I had to be going crazy. There was no way this was real. I even tried convincing myself that maybe I had done something to cause it, left a door open, forgotten to lock the window. But none of that made sense. Then I heard it, a knock on the door. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. That was Sarah. She had to be here. But my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "I'm outside, but there's something wrong. I don't think I should come in. I don't know what happened next. Maybe I panicked, or maybe I was too far gone." I didn't wait to read the rest of the message. I bolted to the door and swung it open. But there was no one there, just the empty hallway. I don't know what happened that night. All I remember is a blur of footsteps, shadows, and a feeling of being watched. The package disappeared the next day, and I never saw that camera again. But the strangest part, the footage. The camera had been recording for days. And when I looked at the footage one last time, I saw something different. The figure wasn't just in the background anymore. It was closer, and I knew then that it wasn't just someone watching me. It was someone who had been there long before I ever set foot in that apartment. Sometimes the scariest part isn't what happens. It's knowing it could happen again. Story 10. I remember the night I'll never forget. It was an ordinary evening, or at least, I thought it was. Just another babysitting gig. Or so I thought. Let me introduce myself first. I'm Sarah. At the time, I was 18 years old, living in a small suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of town. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and the houses are so close you can hear your neighbors' conversations if they're loud enough. I wasn't too different from other teenagers my age. I had my part-time job at a coffee shop and spent most of my time studying, hanging out with friends, or like many girls my age, scrolling through social media. Life was simple, predictable, safe. It was a Friday night when I got the call. I'd been asked to babysit for the Henderson family, 2 kids, a 7-year-old boy named Tim and his 10-year-old sister, Emma. The parents were going out for a rare night out, and they needed someone to watch the kids for a few hours. I'd babysat for them before, so I didn't think twice about it. They lived in a beautiful, old house with creaky floors and a backyard full of overgrown trees. Honestly, it always felt like a bit of a haunted house, but it was one of those homes that was so charming. You didn't mind the odd draft or the occasional squeaky window. I arrived around 7 p.m. I remember the evening air was cool, the sun just starting to dip behind the horizon, casting the street in a soft orange glow. Mrs. Henderson greeted me at the door with a quick hug. She was the picture of exhaustion, but there was something about the way she smiled, like she was happy to get away but also a little on edge. "Everything's fine, right?" she asked. "The kids are already fed, and they'll be good for the night. Just don't leave them alone in the basement or the attic, okay? It's just a bit creepy." I laughed it off. I mean, what kind of babysitter would go exploring in the basement or attic? But she insisted, which I thought was odd. Still, I figured she was just being cautious. After all, she wasn't the first parent to give me strange little rules like that. With the parents gone, I settled in. The kids were already in the living room. Tim sprawled on the couch watching cartoons, Emma reading a book nearby. They were sweet kids, not too hard to look after. I made myself comfortable, grabbing some snacks from the kitchen and turning on the TV. That's when it started. At first, it was nothing major. Just a noise, a low thud, from somewhere upstairs. I paused the TV, straining to listen. Silence. The house was old, and it made sounds. Pipes creaked, floorboards groaned. I assumed it was just the house settling, like I'd heard 1,000 times before. But then, a few minutes later, there was another sound. This time, it came from the hallway, a soft shuffle like footsteps. Again, I told myself it was nothing. The kids were right there with me, and nothing seemed out of place. I smiled and returned to my movie, trying to shake off the creeping sensation that had started to worm its way into my mind. But the noises didn't stop. It was like something was moving around upstairs, pacing back and forth. I looked at Tim and Emma, both seemingly unaware of it. Tim was too engrossed in his cartoons, and Emma was buried in her book, completely absorbed. But then, just as I was about to ignore it again, Emma suddenly looked up from her book and said, "We've been waiting for you." I froze. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she gave me this look. It wasn't a look that children usually give, like she was sizing me up, but also with a strange familiarity, like she knew me. "You've been coming here to watch us for a long time," she said, in a soft, almost matter-of-fact tone. "You just don't remember." I felt a chill run through me. "What do you mean, Emma?" Before she could answer, there was another noise, this time a scraping sound. It came from the basement door, the door that was always locked. I didn't even realize it was open until I saw the faint shadow that passed by it, cast from the dim light of the living room. I tried to laugh it off, but my voice caught in my throat. "Did you leave the basement door open?" Emma didn't seem concerned. She just smiled a little too broadly. "No, it's always open when you come." A cold wave of fear washed over me, but I pushed it down. "Okay, let's get back to the movie, huh?" I suggested, standing up to close the basement door. But as I got closer, the door creaked slowly open, as if something inside was pulling it. I glanced over my shoulder at the kids, but they were still fixated on their own thing, oblivious to the strangeness unfolding around them. I shut the door and locked it, but the sense of unease lingered. I turned back to the kids, forcing a smile. "All right, let's forget about the basement. We'll have some fun, okay?" Tim suddenly looked up at me, his face pale. "You shouldn't go in the basement, you know," he said, voice shaking slightly. "They're in there. They've been in there for a long time." I stared at him, my breath catching. "What do you mean?" Who's in the basement? He looked down at his hands and muttered something about not being able to remember, but Emma's eyes flicked toward the hallway with that same strange, knowing look. And then, things started to get worse. The lights began to flicker. The shadows in the hallway stretched and bent in unnatural ways, creeping toward me like something was about to reach out and grab me. I felt this overwhelming pressure in my chest, the feeling of being watched, but when I turned around, no one was there. I looked back at the kids, my heart racing. They were still sitting there, as if everything was fine, but their faces had changed. Their expressions were colder, their eyes darker. Tim was no longer watching cartoons, and Emma's book lay forgotten in her lap. "We've been waiting for you," Emma said again, this time with an eerie finality. "Waiting for so long." The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching longer than the last. I was starting to panic, my skin crawling with the sense that something was horribly wrong. And then, in a quiet whisper, Tim added, "You'll be with us soon." I took a step back, my legs unsteady. "What do you mean? What's going on here?" My voice cracked. Emma slowly stood up, her eyes locked on mine, the familiarity in them now almost unsettling. "We've always been here," she said, her voice colder than before. "And we've always been waiting." My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to run. I should have run. But my legs felt like they were made of stone. The shadows in the hallway seemed to thicken, closing in around me. I could hear footsteps now, but they weren't mine. They were heavier, more deliberate. Then the sound of a door creaking open, the basement door which I had locked. Before I could even think, I heard a voice from the hallway, soft but unmistakable. "They're here." I spun around, and for the first time I saw it. A shadow, tall and thin, standing just outside the living room, watching me. I didn't wait for anything else to happen. I grabbed my phone and bolted out of the house, calling the parents and then 911 as I ran. But when the police arrived, the house was empty. The basement door was closed, the lights were on, and the kids were gone. There was no sign of anyone, just an eerie silence. The Hendersons came home to a scene that didn't make sense, their kids nowhere to be found, as if they had never existed. The house stood silent, its secrets locked behind closed doors. No one ever spoke of it again. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still hear their voices in my mind whispering, "We've been waiting for you." And sometimes I wonder if I ever really left. It's been months now since I left that house. I've tried to forget. I've tried to move on. But every time I close my eyes, I can still feel them watching me, waiting for the day when I'll come back. It's a strange feeling, knowing that no matter where I go, they'll always be there. In the shadows, in the dark, waiting. And the scariest part, I'm starting to wonder if maybe they're still waiting for me to return. If you made it this far, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more stories that might just keep you up at night.